Today, I am teaching you the difference between an expensive old-fashioned and a cheap old-fashioned. I'm gonna teach you how to make a cheap old-fashioned first here. It's really easy and debatably better in my opinion, but let's make it. You're gonna wanna grab, of course, a cheap whiskey. Angostura bitters. This is cheap. It's not trashy, it's cheap. Your favorite ever fake maraschino cherries. Yep, we're putting a little bit of soda in here and some sugar. Pretty cheap. So first we're just gonna grab about a teaspoon of sugar. You know, in a less fancy bar, there's no way they're measuring out the sugar every time, so we're not doing it either. Now we're gonna get just one maraschino cherry. Oh, that is a juicy one. I'm gonna cut this off screen, they'll never know. Next we'll add a quarter of an orange wedge and 2 dashes of Angostura bitters. And we just muddle that up. Now a lot of people get offended when you muddle an old fashioned, but I don't really get it. As long as you tell the bartender what you want, whether you want it a muddled old fashioned or if you just want a classic, that's up to the guest. People can't read minds, there's so many different types of old fashions. Tell your bartender what you want, don't just get butthurt when they start muddling. And like I said, this is a cheap old fashioned, so we're just gonna go ahead and load this thing up with hand flavored ice. Next we'll add in 2 ounces of whiskey. Now we crack open our Sprite. And you know what? We're not a fancy bar, but we're gonna give that a little bit of a stir. And there you have it, guys. That is a cheap old fashioned. This isn't gonna cost you more than 10 bucks. And if you do pay more than 10 bucks, what are you doing? Cheap but delicious. I really like these types of old fashions. This is a Wisconsin old fashioned, and people hate muddling. They really do an old fashioned. I don't know why that is. The traditional old fashioned was muddled. You wanted to hide that taste of whiskey because back in Prohibition, whiskey and in general, most liquors were so bad that you wanted to mask that flavor. So that's what we did right here with this Wisconsin old fashioned. Now let me teach you how to make a fancy old fashioned. Believe it or not, the expensive old fashioned is actually gonna be a little bit simpler. First, you're just gonna need a nice mixing glass, a quality whiskey. We're actually using rye because Whistle Pig is my favorite whiskey. A little bit of orange bitters. We're stepping up from those, you know, a little bit more average Angostura bitters. Next, we grab our premium cocktail cherries because maraschino cherries just aren't that nice. We're going to get the zest of 1 orange for, you know, later. And just a little bit of simple syrup. So let's make this. First things first, let's grab 2 ounces of our rye whiskey. The fancy bar is pouring liquor all over the place. That's what happens. I had 1 sip of a bad old fashioned and I am already gone. I'm toasted. I'm a lightweight. Make fun of me all you want. It's sad. Now that we got that cleaned up, let's pour out a 1/4 ounce of simple syrup. And this is just gonna give you a little bit more consistency when you're making an old fashioned. I think if you just eyeball a little bit, like a teaspoon of sugar, it's just not gonna dissolve as well and it's not gonna be as consistent. Whereas if you're measuring out your sugar and actually measuring out your simple syrup every time, you're gonna get a much more consistent flavor. Now I love my orange bitters, so now we're gonna do 3 dashes. I just think orange bitters work much better with an old fashioned, believe it or not. Let's be classy. We're gonna grab our large cube, crack it, drop that in, give that a good stir. Some places will actually count the amount of times they stir. I think it's about 60 stirs around the glass is the perfect amount. I don't quite know about all of that. We'll do 60 because we're fancy. This is expensive. This is a $20 drink. We just doubled the price. Now we grab our glass and we're gonna pour this over a large cube because a large cube is gonna melt a lot slower. It's just fancier. That's what you're paying for. Some places will even put their insignia onto the cocktail. We're not doing all that today, but there we go. We're not done yet. Let's express our orange zest. Have a little fun around the glass. Now this part is a little bit debatable, but I personally love a good premium cherry on top. And there you have it. That is an expensive old fashioned. All right, cheers. Let's try our expensive old fashioned and see if it was worth it. Yeah, it was worth it. Obviously, if you like whiskey, this is the way to go. The Whistle Pig is just so delicious in here. It really pairs with everything. It's just an easier way to drink whiskey, I think is kind of what I think of an old fashioned as. I didn't really love whiskey. I still don't love it. It's an enjoyable spirit, but I'm not a whiskey lover by any means. So I think old fashions are a great way to get started with whiskey. Now let's talk about the differences here. Essentially, this was really easy to build. It's just a couple ingredients, whereas this was actually a little bit more complicated. And again, this is more of a cocktail, whereas this is just something to accentuate the whiskey and make it a lot more fun, a lot more enjoyable without changing it. Whereas the Wisconsin Old Fashioned, it really is a cocktail. You're mixing it up. You're even adding soda to this. And it's just not, I mean, look at it. This just doesn't look like, you know, your big burly whiskey man drink. So I think that's another reason people hate on the Wisconsin Old Fashioned. I mean, you know, if we're going with the stereotypes out here, this looks like something a woman would probably drink. I would drink it. I drink pink drinks every single day of my life. Cosmos forever. And this I would have more fun with while going out. Whereas this, I'd order at a cigar bar. If I'm trying to impress a client, maybe. I'm probably not gonna order my little Cosmo. You know, that's me. But I will order this just for the cherry. I have been blanking this whole video on what those are, Luxardo cherries. That's why it's an expensive old fashioned, because a Luxardo jar of cherries runs you like $35 for just a jar. And that's why it goes in expensive old fashioned. But the differences are there. They're definitely two different cocktails. You're gonna pay different prices for it. And if this is what you prefer, I highly recommend telling your bartender that before you order. If this is what you prefer, I bet 7 out of 10 times this is what you're gonna get without asking. But again, they're both really good cocktails and you can enjoy both of them. It's just all about your preference and what you like. So there you have it. That is the cheap old fashioned versus the expensive old fashioned. Two drinks with the same names and totally different tastes.